A very good evening and welcome. You're watching The Hot Seat. Tonight we've got with us a leading figure of the joint opposition, Mr. Dinesh Gunawardena. Fuel prices have been increased, and as a result of that, there has been a debate regarding prices of prices in the transportation sector, prices of school vans. All these are tipped to rise. What is your take on this, sir?
Yeah, I think basically the government's approach is not a practical way of handling this, because if you keep on changing prices every month, mostly it's on the rise. Fuel prices, it affects the entire economic setup, from production to services, the entire sector. And that's why we are having the problem of transport. Bus services had this problem 3 weeks ago. They just came out of it. Again, they have to raise prices, which will affect the vans, the three-wheelers, the whole entire
bakery owners, canteen owners.
Managing the economy for the industry. If you have a changing expenditure of this nature, it is going to be a virtual chaos.
Now, this whole fuel pricing system that was introduced for petrol and diesel, it definitely adds to the volatility of the economy here in Sri Lanka, and already the rupee is depreciating and all that. What effect do you think that this would have on the Sri Lankan economy?
Sri Lankan economy would further slow down because the costs will increase. Basically what would happen, the costs will increase, and whatever has been planned from the state sector or the private sector for the year will have to be cut down because of this expenditure, which was not foreseen at the beginning of the year. This is the basic problem that we had to see. If it's a quarterly or so every 6 months, it's a different situation.
This is in a situation where every month it's going to be in a different
every
situation.
month, plus taxes, additional taxes coming on the expenditure, which is also another problem that is adding on to the crisis. We are in an economic crisis, monetary crisis.
However, the Prime Minister, speaking to foreign media, has made a statement saying that the situation is not as bad as certain people say it is.
Of course, the Prime Minister has been giving these assurances to the international community, to Parliament, followed by the Governor of the Central Bank, who also gives assurances. If we go back few months, December last year, and from December, how many times these assurances given? But the rupee keeps depreciating. The crisis is not properly managed. The expenditure factor has not been seriously taken into consideration.
And of course, the Prime Minister does not have a viable rapporteur on giving assurances. He did make an assurance that there was no central bank bond scam, but how did that turn out?
That was the biggest crisis that this government has brought on the whole economy. Plus, I think the central bank has now been found the bond scam has been the biggest fraud. No action being taken. You see, the credibility of a government depends.
There is certain action ongoing, though. Arjuna Aloysius is in remand custody also.
Certain action being taken. Certain action taken, but major action still pending.
But the main suspect is still a fugitive.
Main suspect plus some of the reports not tabled before Parliament, up to now. So there is a big question mark among all sectors of our society. Why is this situation dragging like this?
What is major action regarding this?
Former governor has to return, come back to Sri Lanka and answer these questions in court. He's been wanted. Surely we can't get him down, which means the whole it should be shouldered by this government. It is this government that appointed him, had to remove because of the crisis he caused, the fraud, contribution to it, and then we allowed him to leave. So this is half of what we are saying. There are much more to be seen in this issue.
But does
the Prime Minister says we have enough, we have frozen enough to compensate.
Frozen even more, he said.
I don't think so. I don't think so. We have only seen the tip of this whole crisis.
It's just the tip of the iceberg.
And the PM saying we have enough reserves, like saying we have the insurance, we'll pay. But the whole problem remains still a mystery.
Also, the debt crisis in the country also does contribute to the economic crisis situation that we're facing right now. And a UN independent expert on foreign debt has said that Sri Lanka needs to be extremely careful in borrowing from other countries when it comes to the debt burden that Sri Lanka is facing.
Yeah, I think the debt crisis we are facing has to be handled in a much more manageable way. We have gone to the IMF and we are following their conditions. But are we following the conditions? I don't think the government is able to follow their conditions, because the taxation that is imposed on all sections, industry, government servants, private citizens, senior citizens, and even on the younger generation. So what are they trying to take from the people? If the economy is growing, taxation can benefit. But if the economy is not growing, you are only printing at the moment. That is what is happening. And that burden is again on the people. So that is the problem we are having. The debt crisis is added on by the devaluation, pressure on the rupee getting devalued, withdrawal of the bonds, whatever the investments being withdrawn. Again, it's on the pressure is on the rupee, and doubt of the investors to come in.
These doubts of the investors to come and invest in Sri Lanka is stirred up by the political instability in the country, the political uncertainty, the economic uncertainty in the country. Now, of course, the joint opposition and the Podujana Peramuna are asking the people for their mandate. Does the joint opposition and the Podujana Peramuna have a viable plan to bail out the people from this current situation that they're in?
The current situation that this government is taking the country into, the last 2.5, 3 years, is getting into worse and worse. In simple language, the crisis cannot be managed by the government. Every day the rupee is getting depreciated. Average man is burdened with the rising cost of living, less income. Now the joint opposition was formed, and joint opposition has been raising these issues in parliament and outside in order to prevent this situation leading to a crisis of this nature, which the government has ignored. But the government itself politically is not together. There are not only two major parties, so many contradictions within the leadership of the government, which itself creates
political uncertainty.
And the confidence is deteriorating.
Is there stability within the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, the joint opposition? Is Namal Rajapaksa's name keeps coming out over and over again, and he seems to be vying for a leadership role in the Podujana Peramuna. Is he the leader of the Podujana Peramuna?
Now, the Podujana Peramuna is a separate political party. The joint opposition composes of 7 political parties.
Okay.
So, internal affairs of the Podujana Peramuna is very difficult for me to comment. Each party has its own political programs as well as joint political programs. But I must say, Namal is also an active member of the joint opposition as well as Podujana Peramuna. And the last protest campaign, what the joint opposition is trying to pressure on the government is to restore our democratic rights. Let the people decide. Give the people.
Is Namal Rajapaksa a possible contender for the presidential election?
Of course, at the moment we have not discussed at all on the presidential election. So
shouldn't you be discussing regarding the presidential election?
No, presidential election is another 12 or 14 months away. We are trying to win a provincial election, which we are trying to force the government to hold, which the government is dodging. The entire 11 months they have been dodging. 3 provincial councils.
But even the limitation report, when it was presented in Parliament, there wasn't a single vote in favor of the delimitation report. Doesn't anyone in Parliament want the provincial council elections to be held?
Including the government that proposed it. It's the government that created the delimitation process and prevented elections being held by the election commission. They rushed in midnight amendment to a bill. Soon after the Supreme Court turned down a government initiative to postpone elections. Supreme Court very clearly declared that there should be a referendum if you are postponing elections. So the entire process of postponement and delimitation is government's baby, and they couldn't vote for it.
Exactly.
Which shows the bankruptcy of their own policies, not only economic, even political programs that is boomerang on the government.
Political instability, economic instability, more issues that face the country will be discussed after this short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching The Hot Seat. Welcome back. You're watching The Hot Seat. We are in discussion with the parliamentarian Dinesh Gunawardena, a vocal member of the joint opposition. Sir, before the break we were speaking about the economic crisis and the political crisis that the country is facing. In the face of all of this, the President of the country made a statement that the country should focus more on the next Prime Minister that they elect. He actually gave a set of descriptions of the qualities that a Prime Minister should possess. Does the joint opposition, the joint opposition moreover, have a candidate for Prime Minister of the country to come up next?
Yes, the last elections we had as our leader for the elections former President Rajapaksa, who would have become Prime Minister if he had the majority, which we could have reached the majority if not for the crisis of the SLAP at the last tail end of the election campaign, which created enough turmoil for our voters. So even today Mahinda Rajapaksa will be able to form a government if the UNP government fails. I would say UNP government which is not legitimate today, because they say they have a national government, the bulk of the SLAP has crossed over to us. So the
with the group of 16 coming over as well.
We have, with the group of 16 we are almost 70.
A member of the group of 16, Dilan Pereira, made a statement saying that they will focus on creating a government, an SLFP government led by Mahinda Rajapaksa. Do you see any validity in this statement? Is there a possibility, a practical possibility?
Yeah, the parliament can elect a new Prime Minister at the end of the national government. The national government really has come to an end. It is the speaker who is playing a game today. Sorry to say. He is asking whether the national government functions when the agreement was signed and the SLAP members like Honorable Dilan Pereira, entire leadership says the agreement is over.
It was only signed for a period of 2 years.
2 years. Produce the agreement.
Exactly.
Produce the agreement before the national legislature, the parliament. That is the supreme body that decided on a national government, approving, believing this agreement. But today the agreement is not being produced. This is the crisis we are in.
Hesitation behind withdrawing from a national government is the limitation on the ministerial portfolios that could be offered and the perks and privileges that the SLFP ministers are currently enjoying in parliament.
Yeah, I think the entire government, our politics have come to that. We are only seeking office and power. We forget that the role towards the people and the nation is the highest priority. So it's a matter of who could become a minister, who could become a deputy. As a result, the entire governance in this country has today collapsed. I mean, if the UNP can't run a government on its own, it is the right of the JO to form the next government.
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe recently made a statement that he intends to stay in power until 2030 at the helm of the UNP leadership. Do you think this is favourable for the?
Of course, that is for the UNP to decide. 2030 is,
But as a political
is a
opponent,
long way.
what do you
I
view
don't
it as?
think any of the younger emerging figures of the UNP could wait till 2030. It's a long way. So they have their own problems which they have not been able to overcome. Perhaps by offering few more portfolios, if the Constitution provides, His Excellency the President would take swear them in, the country can go on, but the country will start sinking at this rate. The crisis we are in. It is not the political leadership that is today giving attention to the economy of the country. If not for the private sector and the state officials, the country would have collapsed. At the last moment, it was the governor of the central bank who moved in to save the stock exchange by saying EPF will return. And these are the problems of the country today. Politicians
But these are short-term solutions. These are short-term solutions. On the long term, these will have major repercussions on the country. Who is equipped to face that? Who will bear the responsibility of the burden that the people will have to face in the future?
Yeah, we have to have a change of government. This government has failed. It is very clear. The people have lost its confidence. February 10th this year, the local government was a tremendous defeat to the entire government. Not only the UNP, the entire government put together faced the biggest defeat. After that, this parliament has lost the credibility. Ministers, deputies, all lost their seats, or the areas where they were in charge, which shows there is a serious crisis which should be addressed. Either one must have a general election so that a new parliament could take over, and new parliament could generate more confidence internationally, nationally, and guide the economy to a much more stronger developing state.
Regarding the provincial council elections that are due, do you see the provincial council elections being held on time? Are the preparations on track?
The government says they will hold, but very unlikely, because there's few more legislative amendments that have to be brought if elections are to be held. 3 more are getting dissolved next month, which adds to 6 provincial councils run by the governors. They are the democracy that we were promised of.
All right, you're watching The Hot Seat. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching The Hot Seat. We're in discussion with parliamentarian Dinesh Gunawardena. Mr. Gunawardena, now with the provincial council elections being postponed, in such a backdrop, the president made a statement saying that the presidential elections will be held on time. He said it won't be held before the due date. But do you think there is a threat that the presidential elections can also be postponed?
Presidential elections could be called any day after 8th of January. He could call a presidential election, but he would have to stand if he's calling an early election. But at the tail end of his term, an election is due constitutionally, which cannot be postponed or delayed by the president. That is very clear, and the election commission will have to make preparations few months before. So the process in 12 months would be 12 to 14 months would be presidential elections, unless attempts are being made to prune the presidential powers. We do not know what the government would do, or whether the government would be able to go through, but anyhow they will have to go for a referendum in the end if certain presidential powers are to be reduced, which means a referendum could be something that could come next year. Of course, President Jayawardena did postpone, that is the UNP government did postpone parliamentary elections by way of a referendum. And is this government also inclined to do so, which will be resisted by the country right across from the north to the south, because I do not think this government or any government should be allowed to delay elections.
Corruption has been a point of focus of every government that came into power. If a government led by the Podujana Peramuna, the joint opposition, does come into power at the next general, presidential, provincial council elections, is there an assurance that the corrupt officials of this current regime, much like the central bank bond scam, there's a bond 2, which was another bond scam that happened after the central bank initial bond scam, will these perpetrators be brought to justice?
Definitely, that is the cause for which we are dedicated. And in Parliament and outside, it is not for the JO, this wouldn't have gone so far. And we forced the President not to reappoint the governor again. And we won the day that when the new governor was brought in. And we would see that the entire thing is re-investigated and necessary action will be taken. There will be a new program that the JO would bring in as a new government. It is not the last government same way of handling things. There will be a lot of new institutions that will come in, so that a clear governance would take place on our side, the political side as well as the economy.
When you say re-investigated, are you disregarding the current report that was filed by the Presidential Commission? Do you see flaws?
No, Presidential Commission has only gone into certain aspects. It is not an entirety of the crisis of the central bank or the bond issues under the government and Governor Mahendran. So it has to be completed in order to know the complete picture of it. I think even the judiciary will not perhaps go into entirety. What is before the judiciary goes into. That's all what happens. But this is a much more big, as you say, the second bond scam, and so many other issues which has to be gone into. Perhaps the collapse, possible collapse of our banks because of this bond scam. The extent to which they have been, their credibility that has been damaged.
The bond scam, to a certain extent, went on to depict the Sri Lankan central bank as a den of thieves, as it was at the time.
Very much the central bank's credibility. There's only one central bank in a country. And internationally it is one central bank.
The governor has been implicated to a certain extent.
There was a very famous incident in Portugal, I think about 70 years ago, when the central bank was robbed. The man behind the thing ran away from the country, had written a book, the robbery of the central bank of Portugal. Then he went abroad, and he started dealing with the robbed money with Portugal again. Then the military took over.
Okay.
That was the struggle for democracy for 50 years in Portugal. I hope it doesn't happen to Sri Lanka.
Definitely, we hope that does not happen. The bank robbery in Portugal, the bank robbery in Sri Lanka, more political news will continue to be discussed on the hot seat. But that's it for tonight. Thank you very much, Parliamentarian Dinesh Gunawardena, for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it from the hot seat. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Charlotte Benedict for the Newsfirst team.